I never imagined that the deal I closed would cost me my job, but that's exactly what happened. I was on the brink of earning a $500,000 commission, a milestone that every salesperson dreams about. Yet instead of celebrating, I found myself being handed a pink slip. The company I had poured my blood, sweat, and tears into suddenly told me I was no longer a good fit. But the real reason was far more sinister. They were terrified I'd get paid what I deserved. What followed was a ruthless game of betrayal, but I wasn't going to go down without a fight. I took the client they tried to steal from me and set out to do something no one saw coming. I bankrupted the very division that betrayed me. This is the story of how greed, loyalty, and revenge collided in a battle I never asked for, but won in the end. For months, I had been chasing this deal, working late nights, navigating endless negotiations, and overcoming every obstacle thrown my way. The client was a major player in the industry, and landing them meant not only a huge commission, but also a significant boost to my company's reputation. I wasn't just selling a product, I was building a relationship founded on trust and respect. It felt like everything was finally paying off, until the rug was pulled out from under me. Just days before the contract was signed, I was called into a meeting with upper management, and instead of congratulations, I was given the cold shoulder. The news was devastating. My position was being eliminated. Officially, it was due to restructuring, but I knew better. The timing was no coincidence. The whispers around the office confirmed my worst fears. My bosses were trying to avoid paying my $500,000 commission. The sting of betrayal cut deep. I had dedicated years to this company, always putting their interests first, often at the expense of my personal life. I wasn't just a cog in the machine. I was a top performer who consistently delivered results. But when it came to money, loyalty suddenly didn't matter. I had a choice: walk away quietly or fight back. Walking away wasn't an option. They underestimated me, and that was their first mistake. Instead of retreating, I started gathering every piece of information I could about the client and the internal dealings around the deal. I reviewed contracts, emails, and company policies, looking for any cracks in the facade. What I uncovered was alarming. Not only was the company planning to cut me loose, but they also intended to hijack the client relationship and redirect the commission to another department. This wasn't just about saving money. It was about protecting their egos and control. But I knew the client better than anyone else. They trusted me. And I wasn't going to let that trust be broken by corporate greed. Armed with evidence and a clear plan, I reached out to the client directly, explaining the situation with brutal honesty. To my surprise, they were just as frustrated with the company's shady tactics and were more than willing to consider alternatives. Over the next few weeks, I worked tirelessly to rebuild the relationship, not as a company representative, but as a trusted advisor. I leveraged every contact and resource I had to offer them a better deal, one that truly aligned with their needs and values. The moment I signed the contract with the client under my new venture was bittersweet. It marked the beginning of a new chapter for me and the end of an era for the company that tried to cheat me out of what I earned. What happened next shocked everyone. The company's division responsible for the original deal began to unravel. Without the client's business, their revenues plummeted, and within months, the division was forced to downsize drastically. Rumors spread about internal conflicts, leadership failures, and a toxic culture that finally caught up with them. Reflecting on the entire ordeal, I realized this was never just about money. It was about respect, fairness, and standing up for what you deserve even when the odds are stacked against you. I wasn't just fighting for my commission, I was fighting for my dignity. And while I could have taken the high road and let things slide, I chose to take control of my narrative. This story isn't just about revenge, it's about resilience, strategy, and proving that sometimes the best way to win is to change the game entirely. So if you've ever felt betrayed, undervalued, or underestimated, know that you have more power than you think. This isn't just my story, it could be yours. And as you watch the rest of this series, prepare for a roller coaster of emotions, strategy, and lessons learned the hard way. Because what started as a crushing defeat became the most defining moment of my career. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I wasn't always the kind of person who closed $500,000 deals or shook up entire corporate divisions. In fact, my journey to this point was anything but straightforward. I started out in sales fresh out of college, eager but green, working for a mid-sized tech company called Vexel Solutions. Vexel wasn't a household name, but in the industry, it had a decent reputation for its software products and innovative approaches. I quickly realized that this job was going to be a grind, but I was determined to make my mark. From the very beginning, I took pride in my work ethic. I was the kind of person who stayed late, learned everything I could about the products, and built genuine connections with clients rather than just pushing deals. That approach wasn't always appreciated in a company culture obsessed with numbers, but it got results. Slowly, I climbed the ranks from junior sales associate to account manager, then senior account manager, each promotion a validation of my dedication. But it wasn't just about hitting quotas. What I loved was the challenge of solving problems for clients. Every product pitch was a chance to show how our solutions could change the way they did business. I remember one client in particular, an international logistics company struggling with outdated software. I spent weeks customizing proposals and meeting with their teams, eventually securing a multi-million-dollar contract that set a new record for Vexel. Moments like those made the late nights and tough negotiations worth it. Still, Vexel was a tough place to work. The higher-ups were demanding and often unapproachable. The culture was competitive to the point of toxicity, with managers constantly playing politics and rewarding those who played along. It wasn't unusual to see talented people get sidelined because they refused to fit in. I made it a point to keep my head down and focus on results, but even I felt the pressure. Every success was met with scrutiny, every failure magnified. That pressure only intensified when the opportunity I'd been working toward for months appeared on the horizon. The client was a major player in the healthcare industry, MedAccess Corporation. They were looking for a comprehensive software overhaul to modernize their operations nationwide, a deal estimated at $15 million. Closing this contract would not only earn me a massive commission, but also position Vexel as a dominant force in healthcare tech. Landing MedAccess was no easy task. The company had been burned by vendors before, and their procurement process was notoriously rigorous. I had to coordinate with multiple departments, understand complex regulatory requirements, and manage a team of technical experts. It was exhausting, but every meeting brought me closer to sealing the deal. I built a personal rapport with key decision-makers, offering transparency and honest advice rather than hard sells. They trusted me. Around this time, I began to realize that the stakes were higher than I'd imagined. Rumors circulated that certain executives were wary of the commission payout. $500,000 was a significant sum, especially for a company trying to tighten its belt. I overheard whispers of budget reviews and cost-cutting initiatives that made me uneasy. But I kept my head down and pushed forward, confident that my work would speak for itself. Then came the moment when everything changed. I was called into a meeting with the VP of Sales, a man known for his ruthless efficiency and zero tolerance for distractions. He congratulated me on the progress, but dropped a bombshell. The company was restructuring, and my role was being eliminated. Officially, it was a cost-saving measure. Unofficially, it was clear that my commission was the real issue. The message was subtle but unmistakable. I was no longer wanted, and they were determined to avoid paying me. shock quickly gave way to disbelief. How could a company I had given so much to just discard me at the moment of my biggest success? I asked questions, sought clarity, and even tried to negotiate, but the doors were already closing. HR was cold and formal, providing no room for discussion. The culture I'd tolerated suddenly felt suffocating, and the betrayal cut deeper than any rejection I'd ever faced. But I wasn't done yet. Something inside me shifted that day. I realized that if they wanted to play dirty, I'd have to fight smart. Walking away quietly was never going to be an option, not when my reputation, my hard-earned commission, and my future were on the line. I began to think about ways to turn the tables, how I could leverage my unique relationship with MedAxis to reclaim what was rightfully mine. That plan wasn't going to be easy. The company's legal and management teams were formidable. They had resources and influence that I didn't. But what they didn't have was the trust of the client. And in sales, trust is everything. I was the one who had built that bridge. I knew their pain points, their priorities, and their frustrations with vendors past. That knowledge was my leverage. As I walked out of that meeting, pink slip in hand, I felt a mix of anger, determination, and clarity. This wasn't just about a commission anymore. It was about proving that loyalty, integrity, and perseverance still mattered in a world where greed and politics often ruled. The path ahead would be difficult and uncertain, but I was ready to take the risk. Looking back now, that moment was the true turning point. It marked the end of my chapter with Vexel Solutions and the beginning of a journey that would test every skill I had, challenge my ethics, and ultimately redefine my career. I was about to embark on a battle that went far beyond sales, a fight for justice, respect, and redemption. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I remember that day with crystal clarity. It started like any other, checking emails, preparing for client calls, reviewing proposals, but ended with a gut punch I wasn't prepared for. I had been so close to sealing the MedAxis deal, the biggest contract of my career, worth millions and my largest commission yet, when the walls started closing in. At first, the signs were subtle. A meeting got rescheduled last minute. An email from my manager went unanswered. Then a casual comment in passing from a colleague hinted at restructuring and budget cuts. My mind raced, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe they were just tightening belts, like so many companies were doing. But then I overheard something in the break room that changed everything. Two senior managers were talking, quietly, but not quiet enough. They were discussing how my commission payout would hit the bottom line hard and brainstorming ways to avoid paying it out in full. The word stung. How could a company I'd given years of loyalty to even consider shortchanging me? Especially when it was my hard work that was bringing in this major client. The more I looked around, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about budget cuts or restructuring. This was a calculated move to cut me loose before my commission could be triggered. They wanted to protect the company's money, sure. But even more than that, they wanted to protect their egos and control. My success was seen as a threat, and they were willing to sabotage me to save face. I felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. I'd worked my ass off, stayed late countless nights, and sacrificed weekends to get this deal done. Yet when it came time to reward that effort, they were ready to throw me under the bus. I wasn't just being dismissed, I was being deliberately silenced. That realization was crushing. It's one thing to lose a job, it's another to be betrayed by the people you trusted most. But I also knew I had to keep my head clear. This wasn't the time for emotional reactions, it was the time to get strategic. I started gathering every piece of information I could find about the MedAxis deal and the company's internal plans. I combed through emails, meeting notes, and contract drafts. I talked to contacts discreetly, piecing together the full story. It became obvious that the executives were already plotting to reassign the client to another division, one where they could keep the commission payout much smaller or avoid it altogether. The scariest part was that this kind of corporate maneuvering wasn't new to them. It was part of the culture at Vexel. Politics and power plays took precedence over loyalty or fairness. They believed they could control the narrative and erase my role in the deal, but they hadn't counted on one thing: my relationship with the client. While the company saw MedAxis as just another contract, I saw them as people, decision-makers, who had come to trust me because I was honest and reliable. Over the months, I had built more than just a business relationship. I had built rapport and respect. The client was frustrated with Vexel's internal politics as much as I was. They wanted a partner they could count on, not a company mired in bureaucracy and greed. That gave me an idea. If the company wanted to cut me out, then I could cut the company out and take the client with me. It was a bold move, risky and potentially career-ending, but I had no choice. If I let this slide, I'd lose not only my commission, but also my credibility and future in the industry. I began drafting a plan to approach MedAxis directly, not as a Vexel representative, but as a trusted advisor who could offer real solutions without the red tape. I knew I had to be careful, not to burn bridges or break any laws, but I also knew that transparency and honesty were my best weapons. Emotionally, it was a roller coaster. The sense of betrayal fueled my fire, but I also felt a deep sadness. I had believed in Vexel, in the company's mission, and in the people I worked with. To be discarded so coldly shook me to my core, but the pain also sharpened my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for a paycheck anymore. I was fighting for respect and justice. In those weeks, I prepared for what I knew would be the hardest conversations of my career. I rehearsed how I'd explain the situation to MedAxis, how I'd assure them that my loyalty was to their success, not to the politics of my former employer. I reached out to mentors and trusted friends for advice and support. As I waited for the right moment, I also documented everything. Emails, messages, meetings. All of it became a record of what had happened and what I was about to do. I wanted to protect myself from any legal retaliation and to show the world that I wasn't the villain. The day I finally called the MedAxis procurement lead still sends chills down my spine. I spoke plainly and openly about what had happened, about the internal politics at Vexel, and about my commitment to making sure the client got the best possible outcome. I was honest about the risks and transparent about my intentions. To my surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. They were frustrated with Vexel's instability and welcomed the chance to explore alternatives. Over the next few days, I worked closely with them, listening to their concerns, offering tailored solutions, and building a case for why they should consider working with me independently. What started as a defensive move quickly turned into an opportunity. The client wasn't just a contract anymore. They were partners who believed in my vision and trusted my integrity. And that trust would prove to be the most valuable asset I had. Looking back, I realized that this moment, the moment I saw through the company's plans and chose to fight back, was the true turning point. It set me on a path of risk, challenge, and eventual triumph. But it also forced me to confront hard truths about loyalty, corporate culture, and the price of standing up for yourself. If you're ever faced with betrayal or injustice, remember that clarity and courage can be your greatest allies. Knowing when to stand firm and when to walk away can make all the difference. And sometimes, the best way to win isn't by playing by the old rules, but by rewriting them entirely. Once I knew I wasn't just being phased out but strategically removed to avoid my rightful commission, everything changed. What hurt the most wasn't just losing the money, it was being treated like I was disposable. Like my contribution didn't matter. But as painful as it was, that betrayal gave me clarity. For the first time in months, I wasn't second-guessing myself. I was wide awake, and I was done playing their game. Still, I didn't want to move, recklessly. I knew this wasn't just about quitting a job or salvaging a commission. This was about creating something sustainable, something mine. And more importantly, doing it in a way that was clean and bulletproof. If they were going to try and come after me later, legally or through reputation sabotage, I had to ensure I had all the protection I needed. The first step was legal. I reached out to an attorney who specialized in employment contracts and intellectual property. I needed to know what I could and couldn't do, especially since I was still technically employed by Vexel at the time. The lawyer combed through my contract and gave me 3 crucial insights. First, my commission clause had no clause for reassignment, meaning if I was responsible for the lead and the deal closed, I was owed. Second, there was no non-compete clause long enough or broad enough to keep me from launching a new venture in a different format. And third, and most satisfying, there was nothing stopping me from launching a brand of my own, as long as I didn't steal proprietary assets or breach confidentiality. With that green light, I started laying the groundwork. Nights became work sessions. I'd finish my day job, pretend everything was normal, and then stay up till 3 a.m. planning. I created a new pitch deck, cleaner, more tailored, and more client-focused than anything Vexel ever used. I bought a domain name that was sleek and simple, something that communicated clarity and trust. I designed branding that felt like a breath of fresh air, professional, modern, and client-centric. I named my new venture Lyceum Partners. The name came from the Greek word lysis, meaning to break free, and sim, for synergy. Because I didn't want to just work for clients, I wanted to work with them. I envisioned an agency that actually cared about the human side of business. Not just data, not just KPIs, real relationships, real wins. Of course, building a business while working full-time at a company that might sue me if they caught wind of it wasn't exactly easy. I had to work smart. I used my personal laptop only, nothing from company resources. I registered everything under my name with separate accounts. I even created a digital trail to show the separation in case things ever went to court. It felt a little paranoid, but I wasn't going to give them any leverage. The emotional side was harder to manage. There were days when I felt like I was living a double life, like an undercover agent in my own career. One day my boss called me into a meeting to discuss team cohesion, and I had to sit there nodding along while knowing they were trying to fire me behind the scenes. Another day, a colleague congratulated me on how close the MedAxis deal was to closing, not knowing that behind closed doors, leadership was already planning to cut me out of it. Despite it all, I kept moving. I kept refining my offer. I mapped out every step of the client journey, onboarding, implementation, support, so that when the moment came, I could act fast. I even started soft networking, reconnecting with past clients and dropping hints about something exciting. I might be launching soon. The feedback I got was surprising. So many people said things like, "Honestly, we loved working with you. If you ever go out on your own, let us know." It was all starting to feel real. I wasn't just reacting to betrayal anymore. I was building something that could outlive it. Then came the message that pushed everything into motion. An executive from Vexel forwarded me an internal memo by mistake. I don't think he even realized he CC'd me. In the thread, they were finalizing plans to reassign the MedAxis deal, with the language, "Let's move this forward ASAP to avoid commission complications." That was the smoking gun. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. I forwarded it to my attorney immediately. His response was short but powerful. "They've made it clear. Time to protect yourself. And move." That night, I made the our biggest decision of my career. I wasn't going to wait for them to fire me. I was going to walk. But not before taking control of my own narrative. I began drafting my resignation letter. But I didn't plan to send it just yet. First, I needed to talk to MedAxis, not to poach them, not to pitch them, but to explain the truth. I wasn't trying to steal anyone. I just wasn't going to let a dishonest company drag my name through the mud while claiming my work as their own. I called my contact at MedAxis, a woman named Erica, the VP of Procurement. I had worked with her closely over the past 6 months. She was sharp, fair, and always appreciated transparency. "Erica," I said, "this is a bit unconventional, but I need to talk to you. Off the record." She paused. "What's going on?" And then I told her. Everything. The internal sabotage, the delayed emails, the reassignment strategy, the commission dodge. I made it clear I wasn't asking for anything. I just thought she deserved to know the truth before her company signed a multi-million-dollar deal with people acting in bad faith. There was a long silence on the line. Then she said, "We've suspected something was off on their end. But hearing this from you, it confirms it. Let me call you back." She did. The next day. And what she said next would change everything. The next day felt like an eternity. I kept glancing at my phone, waiting for Erica to follow up. I didn't know what to expect. Was she going to tell me to stay out of it? That she'd still go with Vexel? Or worse, would she inform them of our conversation turning this whole thing into a corporate nightmare? The uncertainty twisted in my gut. But somewhere inside me, I also felt calm, because whatever came next, I knew I had acted with integrity. I told the truth, not to manipulate, but because the client deserved transparency. That alone gave me peace. At exactly 3:12 p.m., Erica called. "Hey, thanks for your patience," she said. "We had a long conversation internally, and we're pulling out of the deal." I blinked. "You're what?" "We've seen too many red flags with Vexel's handling of this process. They were dodging our requests, giving us vague updates, pushing back deadlines. Now we understand why. This isn't how we do business. And frankly, you were the reason we even considered this deal in the first place." I was stunned. I had expected her to be cautious, maybe to pause or delay things. But pulling the deal entirely? That was huge. "And listen," she continued, "you mentioned you were considering starting your own thing. If that's real, and if you think you could take this on independently, we'd like to talk." I had to sit down. I'd gone from being stabbed in the back to getting the green light to take the biggest deal of my career, on my own terms. "Absolutely," I said. "I've already started the process. I'm ready." She smiled through the phone. "Then let's set up a formal pitch next week. Just keep in mind, this needs to be clean. No crossover. I can't risk any legal entanglements." I assured her I'd keep everything above board. As soon as we ended the call, I texted my attorney with the update. He called me back within 5 minutes. "This is big," he said, "but tread carefully. No client files, no shared documents, no proprietary data. Build your proposal from scratch. Make it your own." And so I did. I worked like a man possessed. I redid every presentation deck. I tailored every slide for MedAxis, highlighting the gaps I already knew from the inside, but now presenting them with real solutions, not the cookie-cutter nonsense Vexel always pushed. I built case studies from public information, industry data, and my personal experience, not Vexel's resources. I even created a projected rollout timeline that was faster and more flexible than anything Vexel could offer. And I priced it smartly, fair for them, and profitable for me. By the end of that week, I had what looked like a fully operational boutique consultancy. I registered Lysium Partners as an LLC, bought new hardware, signed up for premium tools. It was still just me, but it felt real. It felt alive. When Erica and her team saw the pitch, their response was immediate. "Let's move forward. Just like that?" I had my first official client. But before I could celebrate, I had one more bridge to burn. Carefully, I drafted my resignation letter. It was clean, professional, and respectful. No dramatics, no accusations. I didn't even mention the commission or the MedAxis deal, just a simple note thanking them for the opportunity and stating that I was moving on to pursue a new chapter in my professional journey. I submitted it at 9 a.m. sharp. By 9:45, my former manager, Dennis, was calling me nonstop. I didn't answer. At 10:12, I received an email marked Urgent Conversation Request. Again, I ignored it. At noon, I got another email from HR. Please be advised, we are processing your exit. Per your employment agreement, any ongoing projects and client communications must be transitioned. They had no idea MedAxis had already left the building and come to me. That weekend, I officially onboarded MedAxis under Lysium Partners. I signed a contract worth $3.2 million over 18 months. I brought on 2 freelancers I'd worked with in the past, designers and analysts I trusted. We hit the ground running. Meanwhile, back at Vexel, panic started to ripple through the team. The MedAxis deal was supposed to be their Q4 trophy. Leadership had hyped it up for months. Now it was just gone. I heard whispers from friends still on the inside. Dennis was under fire. The regional VP was furious. There was even a closed-door meeting to investigate loss of client confidence. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. That moment, sitting at my tiny kitchen table with my laptop and my first real client contract signed, I realized something that gave me chills. I had won. Not just the deal, but my freedom, my dignity, my future. And best of all, I hadn't needed to get revenge in some loud, messy way. I just needed to do the right thing, stay focused, and let the truth do what it always does, rise. But that was only the beginning. Because what I didn't know then was that MedAxis would become my biggest advocate, and what they did next? That would send shockwaves through the industry and leave Vexel scrambling in ways they never saw coming. For the first few weeks after landing the MedAxis contract, I lived in this strange limbo between exhilaration and exhaustion. Every day was packed: client calls, building workflows, onboarding partners, writing reports, and still trying to keep my finances tight while investing into Lysium's infrastructure. But something had shifted in me. It was like I had finally stepped into the version of myself I always imagined when I first started in business. Capable, respected, and free. The work wasn't easy. In fact, it was probably harder than anything I'd ever done inside a big company. There was no safety net, no IT team to call, no marketing department to back me up. Just me, and whoever I trusted enough to bring along for the ride. But with that pressure came something beautiful. Clarity. Every decision, every strategy, every success, it was mine. My name was on it, my risk, my reward. Meanwhile, the fallout at Vexel was worsening. I didn't go looking for updates, they came to me. Former co-workers were reaching out, cautiously, at first. Messages like, "Hey, you got a minute?" or "Just wanted to say congrats on Lysium." Bold move. I didn't engage much. I kept my responses short, professional. I didn't want to stir the pot. But every now and then, someone would share just enough to make me pause. Apparently, Dennis had tried to spin the MedAxis fallout as a client-side issue, that their leadership changed their mind mid-deal. But Erica wasn't having it. She made a formal complaint to Vexel, citing a lack of transparency and disregard for professional standards. Word was, their senior VP had demanded an internal audit. The team Dennis had worked so hard to build was being interviewed, questioned, micromanaged. A few weeks later, I heard that Dennis had been reassigned. Corporate speak for pushed out quietly. The guy who fired me to save money just lost his own career over the very deal he tried to steal. I should have felt triumphant, maybe even smug. But what I felt was peace. This wasn't revenge. This was correction. Things were falling into place because the truth has a way of demanding space, no matter how deeply it's buried. But here's where the real twist came. About a month after onboarding MedAxis, I got an email from someone I didn't expect, the COO of a mid-sized healthcare company called Tervista Solutions. I recognized the name instantly. They had been one of Vexel's long-term prospects, but they were always just about to close. For months, they'd been strung along by Dennis and his team, never quite getting the answers they needed. The email was simple. Erica from MedAxis spoke very highly of you. Are you open to discussing a digital overhaul project we're considering? I took the meeting the next day. They were cautious, inquisitive, but definitely interested. Over the course of 2 weeks, I presented a custom plan for them. Not a recycled pitch, not a generic package. I listened to what they needed, then I built it, they signed. Now, I had 2 clients. 2 massive companies who trusted me over a multi-million-dollar consultancy. Suddenly, I wasn't just an independent consultant. I was becoming a legitimate competitor. That was when the phone calls from Vexel really started ramping up. First, I got an email from legal. They wanted to remind me of my post-employment obligations. Then a letter arrived, formal language about trade secrets and client solicitation. I had my attorney review everything. His response? They're fishing. They have no case unless you actually took something proprietary. You've stayed clean. Still, the tone made one thing clear. They were panicking. They'd underestimated me. They assumed they could cut me out, claim my work, and I'd quietly disappear. But they forgot one simple truth. Relationships matter more than logos. Clients don't stay because of your brand. They stay because of the people who serve them well. That was my edge, and now my name was spreading. Erica wasn't just a client anymore. She became a mentor of sorts. Every time someone in her circle asked about digital transformation, she dropped my name. Lyceum's small, but they're sharp, honest, hungry. Referrals began trickling in. An executive from a biotech startup called me one morning. Erica said you're the guy who gets things done without all the fluff. A hospital network director reached out. I heard you left Vexel and took their crown jewel client with you. We want to hear what you're doing differently. With every new inquiry, my confidence grew, but so did my workload. I had to hire. I brought on a project manager and a junior developer. We were still scrappy, but we were becoming real. I found a shared office space downtown, nothing fancy, but it gave us a place to meet clients and build culture. And all of it, was because someone tried to cheat me out of a $500,000 commission. It's ironic, really. If they'd just paid me what I earned, if they'd honored my work and let the deal go through as it should have, I probably would have stayed. I wouldn't have launched Lyceum. I wouldn't have taken MedAxis. I wouldn't have become competition. But in trying to save money, they lost their most valuable asset, trust. And now they were watching as the relationships they thought they owned walked out the door and came knocking on mine. What happened next would take things to a whole new level. Because one of those new clients, they weren't just looking for consulting. They wanted a partnership. They wanted to invest. And their offer would do more than just grow Lyceum. It would put me in a position Vexel could never touch again. It was a crisp Friday morning when I got the email. Subject line, "Let's talk bigger." I nearly skipped it, assuming it was another vague pitch from a recruiter or someone offering growth solutions. But the name caught my eye. Cassandra Rowe, Strategic Director at Altavita Group. Altavita wasn't just a client lead, they were the client lead. A hybrid tech health firm that had scaled rapidly across Europe and was now moving into the US market. They weren't looking to slowly adopt. They were planning a digital expansion sprint, and they wanted boots on the ground immediately. I remembered their name from an internal pitch list when I was at Vexel. They were considered a white whale, the kind of client that could sustain a whole department. And now they were emailing me directly. The message was short. Heard great things from Tervista and MedAxis. Your name keeps coming up. I'm going to be in town next week. Lunch? Replied immediately. 2 days later, we sat down at a minimalist cafe downtown. Cassandra was tall, poised, and laser-focused. Within minutes of talking, I knew she wasn't just curious. She was serious. We talked about their upcoming expansion, the messy patchwork of systems they inherited from various acquisitions, and their desire for a unified digital vision. Then she leaned forward and said, I don't want another bloated consultancy burning hours just to show me charts. I want someone who knows how to build lean, smart, scalable systems, and fast. I told her that's exactly what Lyceum had been doing. No fluff, no army of interns, just strategy, execution, and results. She nodded, but then pivoted. We don't just want to hire you, she said. We want to partner with you. I blinked. What do you mean, partner? She explained that Altavita had a venture arm. They'd begun investing in niche firms that filled critical operational gaps in their supply chain and technology stack. Instead of contracting vendors, they were acquiring equity in innovative service companies, creating symbiotic growth. And Lyceum apparently fit that profile. I tried to stay cool, but my mind was racing. This wasn't just a contract. This was an invitation to scale beyond what I thought possible. Cassandra laid it out clearly. They'd offer capital in exchange for a minority stake. I'd retain full operational control, but with the benefit of cash infusion, strategic advisors, and a client base primed for rapid onboarding. In return, they'd have preferred access to my services and a vested interest in my company's success. I didn't commit on the spot. I asked for time to review, to think. Truthfully, I needed time to breathe. After she left, I sat alone, coffee, untouched, heart pounding. This was the kind of deal most entrepreneurs only dream about, but it also came with strings, and I had to be sure it aligned with the vision I'd started with. So I called my attorney. Then my accountant, then a mentor from my college days who'd gone on to sell a startup for 8 figures. Each one told me the same thing. These deals don't fall into your lap. If it's legit, and if you trust them, this could be your launch pad. But one conversation stood out. I called Erica. After all, none of this had happened without her. She answered like always. No pretense, just warmth. I told her everything. The offer, the equity stake, the growth opportunity. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, You know what I love about this? They're not trying to own you. They're trying to amplify you. That's the difference. Her words stuck, and that's when I knew. I didn't start Lyceum just to survive. I started it because I believed I could do things better, smarter, fairer, leaner. And if Altavita's partnership could help me do that for more clients, in more places, without compromising who I was or how I worked, then it wasn't a trap. It was a launch. So I signed. The deal closed 30 days later. Altavita wired the capital, and I used every cent with intention. We upgraded our systems, hired 2 more engineers, brought in a UX strategist, and established a compliance consultant to help us prep for international work. Lyceum wasn't just a scrappy freelancer brand anymore. It was a real firm, with processes, reputation, and a growing team. The best part? We didn't lose our edge. Clients kept saying the same thing. You're fast, you listen, you actually solve what we care about. But here's the twist that no one saw coming, not even me. A few months after the Altavita deal, I got a notification that a large RFP had just gone public. It was from Vexel. They were requesting proposals for a digital systems overhaul for one of their floundering healthcare divisions, the same one Dennis used to run. And guess what? Altavita, as a partial stakeholder in Lyceum, was listed as one of the invited participants for bid consideration. In the weirdest turn of events, I now had the chance to bid on a contract that would put me directly in competition with the company that fired me, the company that refused to pay me what I earned, the company that tried to bury me and pretend I didn't matter. And now, I had their attention. It didn't matter if I won the bid. The very fact that I was in the room, on the short list, and being treated as a peer by companies they still dreamed of partnering with, that was the victory. They hadn't just lost a deal. They'd created a rival. It was surreal, sitting across the long glass conference table, staring at a panel of familiar faces from a past life. On the left, I recognized two former Vexel engineers, people I had mentored. Across from me, a VP who once led my performance reviews. And at the head of the table, just arriving, was Dennis. He looked older. Not in age, but in the kind of way someone wears failure without knowing it's already soaked into their suit. His smile was forced, his handshake limp, and yet, his voice still carried that smug tone I remembered all too well. This wasn't a client meeting. This was a bid presentation. One of 3 scheduled that day for the overhaul of Vexel's struggling healthcare division. The budget? $4.2 million. The project scope? Redesign internal software infrastructure, integrate customer data flow, and deploy AI-driven analytics to reduce waste and inefficiency across 4 states. It was the same division I once helped grow from obscurity to industry relevance. The same one they gutted after letting me go. Apparently, the culture fit they wanted hadn't aged well. Their system was outdated, their team overwhelmed, and their clients frustrated. I'd heard whispers, vendor churn, client loss, staff walkouts, and now here I was, back in the same room, but with a different nameplate and a new level of leverage. As I set up my presentation, I caught Dennis subtly elbowing the VP next to him. He was trying to make a show of indifference, but I could tell he was rattled. Maybe not by me, but by the fact that my firm, Lyceum, had earned enough credibility to make it into that room in the first place. The presentation began. I kept my tone calm, clear, and strictly professional. No dramatics, no veiled jabs, just a breakdown of their current system's limitations, the risks they were running by maintaining legacy protocols, and a phased roadmap of what we'd do to fix it. Every slide was backed by case studies, clients we'd rescued, platforms we'd scaled, revenue we'd preserved. For a moment I could feel the room shifting. Arms uncrossed, pens clicked into action. Questions came, not vague ones, but technical ones, smart ones. Even the engineers leaned forward, nodding along as I described the deployment strategy. Then came Q&A. That's when Dennis spoke. So, he began, tilting his head. I have to ask, why should we trust that your firm, relatively new, can handle something of this scale? This is quite an undertaking. It wasn't a question. It was bait. I could have gone for the jugular. I could have mentioned my time in this very building, my record-breaking numbers, the unethical dismissal, or the unpaid $500,000 commission. I could have shamed him in front of his peers. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled and said, "Great question. Lyceum's team is composed of people who've not only built solutions at scale, but fixed the very problems caused by oversights in leadership. We're not just capable, we're motivated, because every system we fix is a reminder of what better leadership could have prevented." Dennis blinked. For the first time, he had no comeback. I left the room with no clear idea whether we'd get the bid. That wasn't the point. The point was, I'd stepped into their space with authority. I'd stood on my own merit. And the respect was tangible. Later that week, I got the call, not from Dennis, but from someone higher up. The board had reviewed the bids and wanted to move forward with Lyceum. but not through Vexel. They were restructuring the division entirely and wanted a clean slate, a new partner, and they wanted me to lead the transformation. Apparently, the internal report they commissioned during the bid process confirmed what I had outlined. Vexel's team had mismanaged the division into the ground. Not only were their systems inefficient, but their leadership, especially Dennis's team, had actively sabotaged key initiatives to protect their own jobs. I was stunned. I didn't even know Vexel was being evaluated internally while the bid was open. But now, it all made sense. The call continued. We've severed ties with the current management team. We'd like Lyceum to begin onboarding as our new solutions partner, effective immediately. I didn't gloat. I didn't call Dennis. I didn't post a passive-aggressive LinkedIn update. Instead, I walked into my team's workspace that evening and told them, "Clear your weekend. We just landed our biggest contract yet." They cheered. Erica nearly cried. Our lead developer shouted something unintelligible and started blasting celebration music. But me? I just sat for a moment, quietly, because I realized something. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't some movie moment where the villain gets a taste of his own medicine and the hero walks away with a smirk. This was justice. Not just for me, but for every overlooked employee, every silenced voice, every hard-working person who's ever been dismissed for politics instead of performance. I had taken what was meant to be my downfall and turned it into the foundation of something far greater. And Vexel? They weren't just losing a contract, they were losing their reputation, their credibility, their division, all because they tried to save a buck by denying me a commission I earned fair and square. And now, they'd be paying 10 times that to clean up the mess. Funny how things come full circle. The Monday after the contract was signed, I walked into our office earlier than usual. It was still dark outside, the city not quite awake, and the hum of the coffee machine was the only sound breaking the silence. There was something sacred about that hour, the calm before a storm I had been preparing for my entire career. We had signed a multi-year agreement. The total value? $4.2 million spread across implementation, consulting, and long-term system support. It was the kind of deal that would have made Vexel pat themselves on the back for a year. And now, it belonged to us. A 6-month-old boutique, firm operating out of a converted co-working space with no fancy branding, no decades-old reputation, just grit, vision, and the memory of betrayal. But now came the real challenge: execution. Lyceum wasn't just going to deliver. We were going to raise the bar. I gathered the team later that morning in the conference room, which, until 2 weeks ago, had doubled as a supply closet. The energy was electric, but I could see the pressure in their eyes. A few of them were fresh out of startups. A couple, like Erica, had taken pay cuts to join something they believed in. This contract was our launchpad, but also our test. I didn't sugarcoat it. We've been handed an opportunity most companies our size never get. And we didn't get it through luck. We got it because we told the truth. Because we didn't play politics. Because we showed what real, thoughtful systems leadership looks like. So now, we work. Not to prove anything to them, but to prove everything to ourselves. And with that, we got to it. The first few weeks were intense. Data audits, platform analysis, vendor meetings, and lots of red flags. Vexel's system was worse than I imagined. Most of the tech stack was stitched together with outdated APIs and temporary patches. Their support team was logging more internal tickets than external ones. One file we found still had my name in the metadata from a version I had created 2 years ago. I'll admit, seeing it hit me like a punch to the chest. But I didn't linger, because we had bigger things to do. We brought in AI specialists to help automate triage and data consolidation. We implemented a hybrid infrastructure that merged on-premise legacy servers with a new cloud-based dashboard, reducing latency by 47% in the first month. But it wasn't just the tech we fixed, it was the trust. I started scheduling one-on-one sessions with staff who had survived the Vexel management era. Many were exhausted, cynical. One woman broke down crying during our call, telling me how she had tried to speak up when Dennis began cutting corners, and was nearly fired for it. "We weren't failing," she whispered. "We were sabotaged." That hit me hard, so I made a promise. Not just to her, but to everyone involved. This wouldn't just be a systems upgrade, it would be a cultural reset. I invited feedback from every level of staff, not just C-suite. We integrated their insights into how we restructured workflows. And as morale lifted, so did the results. The division saw a 22% bump in client satisfaction within the first 2 months. Response time dropped from 9 hours to 2.7. Employee churn slowed to nearly 0. It was working. But we didn't stop there. I pitched the board a bold idea. Not only would we rebuild the systems, but we would also launch a white-label version of the software to license across sister companies under their parent conglomerate. They were stunned. This was supposed to be a salvage operation, one executive told me. "Now you're talking expansion?" I just smiled. "I'm talking vision. Something your last partners forgot how to have." They greenlit it. Just like that, we weren't just fixing the wreckage Dennis left behind. We were turning it into a launchpad for the future. And speaking of Dennis, word got around that he had quietly resigned a week after the board finalized. The transition. No announcement, no farewell email, just a silence as sharp as the suit he used to flaunt. I never reached out. I didn't need to, because every success story we were writing now, every staff member who felt seen again, every client who sent thank you messages, every system we rebuilt from the ashes, was already louder than anything I could ever say to him. One afternoon, Erica came into my office with tears in her eyes. She had been running support feedback audits and came across a note from a nurse in the Midwest whose clinic had been operating under the healthcare division's umbrella. It read, "We used to dread calling support. Now, we feel like someone actually cares. I don't know what changed, but thank you. You've made our work feel possible again." We just stared at the screen for a moment. I thought back to the moment I was fired, to the final check I never received, to the disbelief that my loyalty and record-breaking deals had meant nothing. And now? Now I wasn't working for them. I was working for people like her. This was what it was always supposed to be about. Not titles, not revenge, but impact. And as I sat in that moment, I realized something I hadn't admitted to myself until now. They didn't just fire me to avoid paying my commission. They fired me because they were afraid of what I could become without them. Turns out, they were right. When I first walked out of Vexel with that cardboard box in my hands and a pit in my stomach, I never imagined that 1 year later, I'd be speaking at an industry summit as a case study in ethical disruption. Yet there I was, on stage, under bright lights, with the Lyceum logo projected behind me, and a crowd of a few hundred tech executives leaning in to hear how a culture-fit firing led to one of the most unexpected wins in our industry. I didn't start with metrics. I didn't start with the drama. I started with a simple question. What happens when your company punishes integrity? A few people shifted in their seats. Some smiled knowingly. Others sat still, stone-faced. I spoke openly about how I landed the $4.2 million deal not because I played politics, but because I didn't. About how I built a team that believed in people before products. About how I took the very same tools Vexel buried under bureaucracy and used them to rebuild a division they nearly destroyed. There were moments during the talk when I paused and scanned the room. I caught sight of familiar faces, people I had once shared elevators with, now watching from the crowd. A few lowered their eyes when I met their gaze. Others nodded, almost apologetically. One stood out. Melissa Yates. She'd been Vexel's director of sales enablement. We had never worked closely, but I knew she was sharp, and I also knew she had stayed behind after the layoffs, reportedly helping Dennis clean up the mess. After my speech, she approached me quietly near the refreshments table. Her eyes didn't hold the cold calculation I remembered. "I've been following what you've built," she said. "And I'll be honest, a lot of us didn't see it coming. We thought you'd go freelance for a while and then disappear." I sipped my water. "You and me both." She smiled. "You turned the whole division around. They talk about you in board meetings now. Not as a warning, but as a standard." I raised an eyebrow. "That's ironic." Melissa looked down, then back at me. "What Dennis did. What the leadership signed off on. It was rotten. Some of us knew. Some of us didn't want to know. I regret not speaking up." Her honesty caught me off guard. I had come to this summit expecting professional networking, not closure. I nodded, slowly. "It's hard to speak up when silence pays better." We both stood there in silence for a moment. And in that quiet, I realized I no longer carried the anger I once did. Not toward her. Not even toward the others who had turned their backs when I needed them most. That was the difference between who I was then and who I had become now. Success had been the first act. Clarity was the second. In the weeks that followed, the industry chatter only grew louder. Tech newsletters started running headlines like, "Startup Breaks, Legacy Stronghold with Record Growth, From Fired to Fortune, The Rise of Lithium, One Deal, One Decision, One Disruption." Journalists reached out. Analysts requested interviews. Even former Vexel clients started poking around. I received LinkedIn messages from executives at rival firms, many of whom now wanted to explore synergies or discuss opportunities to collaborate. It was surreal. But not everything was praise. As Lithium's profile grew, so did the resistance. We heard whispers that Vexel's remaining leadership was quietly lobbying against us. One of our project bids was mysteriously disqualified after a senior advisor, once tied to Vexel, joined the selection committee. A smear blog post circulated anonymously, accusing us of weaponizing ethics for profit, though the claims were easily debunked. It was clear. We weren't just disrupting systems anymore. We were threatening legacies. Erica called it the rattlesnake effect. "They're shaking now," she told me during one of our late-night brainstorming sessions. "Because we're not just a cautionary tale anymore. We're competition." And she was right. But here's the thing. I wasn't interested in war anymore. Not really. I had been fueled by anger, sure. Betrayal lit the spark. But somewhere along the way, that fire turned into something else. Something steadier. Purpose. Vision. A drive to create something that couldn't be taken away just because a couple of executives got nervous about paying someone what they were worth. One afternoon, I revisited the old email thread with Vexel's HR team, the one where they explained, in polished legalese, how I was not aligned with the evolving needs of the company culture. I hadn't deleted it. I kept it, like a scar. Reading it now, it felt like it was written for someone else, a past version of me. A guy who still needed their approval, who still thought justice would come with an apology or a check. But I didn't need either of those things now, because I had something they could never fake. Respect, not from headlines, but from my team, from the clients who now depended on us, from the young consultants we mentored who saw that you could win without selling out. That was worth more than any commission. Still, I would be lying if I said I wasn't keeping score. 1. Night, over dinner with my lead engineer, we toasted to the fact that our firm had quietly absorbed 3 of Vexel's old clients over the past 4 months. Each time, the story was the same. Too slow, too corporate, too stuck in their ways. Every time I smiled, not because they were failing, but because we were building what they said I never could. As I walked home under the city lights that night, my phone buzzed with another new lead, another referral from someone who had heard our story. I paused, on the corner of 7th and Belmont, watching traffic rush past, and let myself take a breath. This wasn't just about proving them wrong anymore. This was about proving what was possible. 3 months after my keynote, I got a phone call I never expected. It was a former junior manager at Vexel, Jared, I think his name was, who had once ghosted my emails for weeks and never showed up to any of the onboarding calls I had led. Back then, he barely looked me in the eye. Now, he was calling to ask if there might be any openings at Lyceum. "I've been meaning to reach out," he started, his voice almost sheepish. "Things at Vexel aren't looking good." I didn't ask him to explain. I already knew. Word had been getting around. Vexel's once dominant enterprise solutions division was hemorrhaging clients, most of whom were leaving quietly without notice. The senior leadership team was reshuffling, again. Dennis, the man who had fired me under the guise of culture misalignment, had reportedly been moved to an advisory-only position, which in corporate language means boxed. Out, but too expensive to fire outright. Their stock hadn't collapsed, but it was limping. Internally, morale was worse than ever. One anonymous Reddit thread described the place as an empty shell of buzzwords and Slack messages, while another posted a grainy photo of a floor of the office that had once been bustling, now dimly lit, with rows of unused desks. Vexel hadn't died, but it was slowly being forgotten, and as much as I thought it would feel like vindication, it didn't. It just felt sad. I told Jared we weren't hiring at the moment, but I'd keep him in mind. He thanked me, genuinely, and hung up. I sat with that call longer than I should have, because Jared wasn't the villain. He was just a guy trying to survive a toxic system like most of us. And honestly, I almost respected his decision to jump ship. At least he had the self-awareness to see the writing on the wall. But Vexel? They hadn't changed. Not really. They'd doubled down on the same playbook that caused their collapse. Ego-driven leadership, short-term wins over long-term relationships, cutting corners while trying to spin everything as strategic repositioning. If anything, they were now stuck in a cycle of shallow rebrands, hoping the market wouldn't notice how hollow everything had become. And while they clung to what was left, we were flying. Lyceum wasn't a rocket ship. It was a formation. Intentional. Precise. Agile. We weren't the loudest name at the table, but we were the one people trusted when things got tough. And that was our real advantage. Not just the client wins or revenue growth, not even the talent we'd attracted. It was the trust. Trust took time to build. And it wasn't flashy, but once we had it, it was nearly unshakable. What surprised me most, though, wasn't the professional wins. It was the personal ones. My relationship with my family had deepened in ways I hadn't expected. For years, they'd watched me chase success like a man on fire. They were proud of me, sure, but I could tell they'd always been worried I'd burn out. And maybe I would have if Vexel hadn't forced me to stop and rethink everything. I started seeing them more. Talking, not just texting. Actually showing up for birthdays and Sunday dinners without needing to rush back to prep for Monday meetings. Dad pulled me aside one day and said, "You're not just working anymore. You're living." And it struck me. He was right. There was a time I measured everything in wins and losses. A time when I thought losing that $500K commission was the biggest betrayal I'd ever face. But now, I realized it had been a redirection. A painful one, yes, but necessary. And the beautiful thing about being forced to start over? You get to choose what you bring with you. At Lyceum, I didn't just build a company, I built boundaries. I didn't glorify overwork. I didn't reward politics. And I didn't pretend that everyone had to be a family to work well together. We built something based on respect, not culture fits. On fairness, not favoritism. And most importantly, on transparency. That alone made us different. But despite all that growth, there was still one thing I hadn't done. I hadn't revisited Vexel's offices, not once, not even to drive by. Until one morning, 6 months after that industry summit, I found myself with a meeting across the street from their building. It was purely coincidence, or fate, depending on who you ask. The conference room we'd rented had a full glass view of their office tower. It was noon. I looked across, expecting to feel some familiar rush of anger or validation. But all I felt was nothing, just a gray building, a logo I used to care about, a company that no longer defined me. My phone buzzed, a text from Erica. "We just got confirmation. Legacy Tech is onboarding with us. It's official." Legacy Tech was the one client Vexel had held onto through every storm, the client they always bragged about at conferences, the one Dennis had used as a case study for strategic partnerships. And now they were ours. It wasn't personal. It was inevitable. I smiled, slid my phone back into my pocket, and turned back to the meeting. Later that week, I got a handwritten note from a former Vexel intern who had joined our firm. He'd left it on my desk before heading back to college. It read, "Thank you for showing us we don't have to sell our souls to succeed." And that, I realized, was the legacy I wanted. Not revenge, not a reputation for playing hardball, but the idea that integrity could win, that being fired might be the best thing that ever happens to you, that you could lose a $500K commission and still walk away richer than ever, just not in the way you first imagined. Sometimes, being forgotten by the wrong people is the best way to be remembered by the right ones. In the months that followed, I found myself reflecting more and more on the journey. Not the rise, not even the fall, but the strange limbo in between. That period after I got fired from Vexel, but before Lyceum took off. The quiet chaos, the stillness that almost broke me. That's what stuck with me the most. When people heard my story, the commission, the client, the comeback, they always focused on the climax. "You got them back," they'd say, their eyes lighting up. That must have felt amazing. And yes, it did, but they never asked about the in-between. The lonely nights when I doubted every decision, the self-loathing, the paranoia, the shame. That was the real fight, not the lawsuit, not the startup headaches, not even Dennis or his ego. It was the voice inside my head whispering, "Maybe they were right about you." That voice took longer to silence than any competitor, and I don't think it ever fully leaves. It just gets quieter when you finally learn to trust yourself again. People talk about revenge like it's some glorious finale, a trophy you hoist up when the battle's over. But the truth is, it's never as clean as that. Sure, I'd won, financially, professionally, even publicly. But that didn't undo the damage. It didn't erase the humiliation of being let go like I was some problem. It didn't suddenly make me immune to fear. The win wasn't revenge. The win was that I didn't give up, because there were days I almost did. There was a specific night that kept replaying in my mind, a Thursday, 2 months after I'd been fired. I'd applied to 37 jobs that week, got ghosted by 35. The only 2 that responded offered commissions at half of what I used to earn, and one of them had the audacity to ask if I could prove I wasn't too emotionally damaged from being let go. I closed my laptop that night, lay on the couch, and stared at the ceiling in silence. I remember thinking, is this it? Is this where I peak? Fired for being inconvenient and quietly replaced by someone cheaper? And yet, somehow, I got back up the next day. That's what people forget. The resilience doesn't come from some epic montage moment. It comes from the boring, painful, invisible act of showing up again, when everything tells you not to. It's the decision to believe you still matter even when the world tells you otherwise. It's applying for job number 38. It's sending another cold email. It's writing another pitch when you feel like no one's listening. That's where the win starts. In those cracks, Lyceum didn't grow because of revenge. It grew because we filled a vacuum that others ignored, because we prioritized people, because we didn't try to be trendy, we tried to be true. We listened more than we spoke. We customized solutions instead of copy-pasting decks. We actually showed up to the meetings, to the brainstorms, to the hard conversations that no one else wanted to have. And that's what our clients noticed. There's a story I haven't told yet about Mr. McAllister, CEO of Dalcom, one of the earliest companies to take a chance on us. He was nearing retirement, old school in every way, and deeply loyal to his vendors. We weren't even on his radar at first, but one of our pilot projects accidentally landed on his desk. Not because we sent it there, because his assistant printed the wrong report. And it caught his eye. He called me directly. "Who the hell are you?" he asked, not unkindly. "Someone trying to do things differently," I said. He laughed, and we ended up talking for almost 2 hours. 6 months later, Dalcom moved their entire innovation budget over to us, not because we were flashier, but because we asked better questions, because we cared about results after the contract was signed, because we made them feel seen. That client alone opened up more doors than any single marketing campaign we ever ran, and it reminded me, you don't need everyone to believe in you. You just need the right ones. Looking back, I'm almost grateful for what Vexel did. Almost. Because if they hadn't pushed me out, I might still be stuck in that high-rise chasing someone else's version of success. I might still be working 70-hour weeks to protect a system that would never truly protect me. Instead, I'm building something that reflects me, my values, my ethics, my vision, and that's worth more than any commission. Don't get me wrong. I still wanted my money. I still believed what they did was wrong. And yeah, I loved watching their division collapse. But it's funny how your priorities shift once you realize the win isn't proving them wrong, it's proving yourself right. These days, people come to me for advice. Founders, freelancers, even ex-Vexel employees. And I always tell them the same thing. Your worth isn't based on how easily you fit in. It's based on what you stand for when everything gets uncomfortable. Because the truth is, they didn't fire me for a culture misalignment. They fired me because I believed in delivering results, not politics. Because I pushed back when they tried to cheat a client. Because I held them to their own standards, and that made me inconvenient. But in doing so, I became irreplaceable to the people who do matter. That's the real power. Not fame, not headlines, not revenge, integrity, and, in a world full of noise, that might be the loudest legacy of all. You don't always get to see the fallout of the choices people make, especially when those choices are ugly, petty, or built on pride. But in this case, the ripple effect was impossible to miss. Vexel's innovation division didn't just struggle, it flatlined. Within 6 months of my departure, they'd lost 4 major accounts. Not just the client I took with me, but 3 others who quietly walked away. The reasons were different on paper: shifting strategies, internal restructuring, market reorientation, but I knew the real cause: no trust. Once, one company heard how Vexel tried to dodge a commission by firing a top performer. The others paid closer attention. Clients don't like working with companies that cut corners or burn their own people, especially when those people are the ones keeping everything afloat. Dennis, the man who orchestrated my exit, was reassigned to a non-client-facing role. Translation: he was quietly pushed into a back room, stripped of real authority. Few of my former teammates told me he showed up less and less, spending more time in meetings with HR and legal than with clients. By the 1-year mark, he was gone entirely. No public announcement, no LinkedIn farewell post, just gone. Karma doesn't always knock loudly, but it does knock eventually. The most surreal part? Vexel's board reached out to me. It happened on a Tuesday. I was reviewing projections with my co-founder when I got the email. Very corporate, very polished. But beneath the legalese was a simple message. Would I consider consulting for the company? The irony was so thick, I laughed out loud. After all the humiliation, the lies, the gaslighting, now they wanted me to help them pick up the pieces. For a second, just a second, I considered it. Not out of ego, but out of curiosity. Would it be worth it to walk back into that building, head high, and remind them who they underestimated? But then I thought about my team, the culture we'd built at Lyceum, the energy in our meetings, the way our interns felt empowered to speak up, the lack of fear and pretense. I thought about all of that and realized I couldn't walk back into that world even if I wanted to. They didn't need a consultant. They needed a soul transplant. So I declined. Politely, of course, but firmly, because some doors deserve to stay closed. Meanwhile, Lyceum was hitting milestones we never imagined in our first year. We'd secured Series A funding, brought on a few incredible advisors, and were being invited to speak at conferences. I used to attend just to network near the coffee machine. But even amid the growth, I kept reminding myself, never become the thing you escaped. Power has a strange way of warping your memory. Success can blur the lines. You forget what it was like to be disposable, to be the outsider, to be the person who wasn't invited to the meeting because someone decided you didn't fit the culture. But I didn't want to forget. That pain had shaped me, and it had taught me something more valuable than any MBA. People don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad leadership. So I made a promise. If I ever found myself in the same position Dennis was in, making decisions about who stays and who goes, I'd do it differently. I'd make space for dissent. I'd reward integrity, not politics. I'd encourage the kind of bold ideas that once got me labeled difficult. Because here's what they never understood. Loyalty isn't built through free snacks and corporate buzzwords. It's built through respect. One of the most unexpected outcomes of this journey came when I started mentoring. At first, it was just a few young professionals who messaged me on LinkedIn after hearing the story. Then came panels, workshops, even an invitation to guest lecture at a university's business ethics course. And every time I stood in front of a crowd, I told them the same thing. Don't be afraid to be the one who walks away when things don't feel right. Don't confuse a paycheck with peace of mind. And if you ever find yourself at a crossroads, ask yourself this. Is your silence costing more than your voice would? Because mine nearly did. I think that's what stings the most about what happened at Vexel. It wasn't just that they fired me. It's that for a long time I agreed with them. I let their decision define my worth. I internalized their rejection and carried it like proof that I didn't belong. But the truth? I didn't belong there, not because I lacked value, but because they lacked vision. In the end, I didn't just take the client. I didn't just bankrupt their division. I reclaimed my voice, and I used it to build something better. I remember talking to Sandra, our head of operations at Lyceum, after one of our biggest deals closed. She looked at me and said, I never thought I'd enjoy working in corporate again until this. That was the real reward. Not the headlines. Not the profits, but hearing people say, I feel safe here. I feel seen. That's legacy. Because companies rise and fall, titles change, bank accounts grow and shrink. But how you make people feel, that lasts. And if there's anything I've learned from this wild, chaotic journey, it's this. You can lose a job. You can lose a deal. You can even lose your reputation temporarily. But if you stay rooted in who you are, and you refuse to play by the rules of the broken systems that try to silence you, you will always eventually win. Not because you fought dirty, but because you stayed true. Life has this uncanny way of teaching us lessons we never signed up for. You think you're battling one fight. Maybe it's losing your job, getting betrayed by a company you poured your heart into, or watching your hard work get brushed aside. And suddenly you realize the real battle is much bigger. It's the fight to reclaim your own sense of worth, to rebuild your identity from the ashes of rejection and betrayal. When Vexel fired me, using the vague excuse of culture, fit to dodge my $500,000 commission, I was devastated. But the real devastation came after the dust settled, when I sat alone with my thoughts and the weight of what had happened. It wasn't just losing the job. It was the sting of rejection, the fear of what came next, and the gnawing question, did I fail? That question haunted me. I went over every detail in my mind. Was I too aggressive? Too outspoken? Did I push too hard for what I knew I deserved? Or was it simply that I didn't fit into their narrow definition of team player? The kind that stays silent when injustice happens. The kind that keeps their head down and doesn't rock the boat. The answer, I slowly realized, wasn't about me. It was about them. About a corporate culture that valued convenience over integrity, appearances over truth, politics over people. But realizing that truth didn't erase the pain. It didn't heal the nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd ever get another chance. It didn't fix the awkward calls from recruiters who seemed skeptical when I told them the real story. What no one ever prepares you for is how to pick yourself back up when you feel completely broken. How to stop letting others define your value. How to forgive, not just those who hurt you, but yourself for letting their words sink in so deeply. Forgiveness was the hardest lesson. For weeks, I let anger consume me. I wanted to fight back, to expose the truth, to make sure everyone knew exactly how Vexel had tried to cheat me out of my commission and push me out the door. That rage gave me energy, for a while, but eventually, rage ran out of steam. What replaced it was something far more powerful: acceptance. Acceptance that some people and places simply aren't meant for you. Acceptance that sometimes the only way forward is to build your own path. Acceptance that life's unfairness is just part of the journey, not the destination. Once I made peace with that, I could finally focus on the future. On the bigger picture. I started to see my story not as a tragedy, but as a turning point, a catalyst that forced me to reevaluate what I really wanted from work, from leadership, and from myself. I wanted to create something different, something real. Something that valued people as much as profits. A place where loyalty was rewarded, where voices weren't silenced, where bold ideas were encouraged instead of crushed. That's how Lyceum was born. More than a company, it was a mission, a promise to myself and everyone who joined me that this time we'd do it right. We'd build a culture based on respect, transparency, and trust. Where culture fit meant welcoming diversity of thought, not enforcing conformity. And I wasn't alone in that vision. Former colleagues who'd felt sidelined and betrayed found their way to us. Mentors who believed in honest leadership helped us navigate challenges. Friends reminded me constantly that my value extended far beyond the job I lost. One of the most unexpected gifts from this journey was discovering the power of community. Began mentoring others who'd faced similar struggles. Young professionals sidelined for speaking up, creatives pushed out for being too different, people who felt invisible in rigid corporate worlds. Their stories echoed mine. Their pain was real. Together, we built a network of resilience and hope, speaking on panels, hosting workshops, even guest lecturing on business ethics. I realized that sharing my story wasn't just cathartic. It was necessary. It gave others permission to stand up, speak out, and refuse to settle. I learned that the best way to reclaim your power after rejection isn't by tearing others down. It's by lifting yourself and others higher. But the hardest lesson of all was learning not to let rejection define me. It's easy to fall into the trap of believing that getting fired, passed over, or ignored means you aren't enough. But those moments don't tell the whole story. They don't decide your future. They're just chapters. Sometimes painful, sometimes unfair, but never the final word. When you're knocked down, you have a choice. Stay there, or get up stronger. I chose to get up. Not because it was easy, not because the path was clear, but because I knew that my worth wasn't tied to any one company, title, or paycheck. It was tied to my courage, my integrity, my refusal to let fear or bitterness rule my life. And that's the message I want you to hear. Whoever you are, wherever you're at, if you've ever been told you don't fit in, don't belong, or aren't good enough, know this. You do belong. You are good enough. Your voice matters. You don't have to change who you are to succeed. You just have to find the place that values you. And if that place doesn't exist yet, build it. Because in the end, the greatest victories aren't about money or prestige. They're about reclaiming your story, your power, your peace. They're about living authentically in a world that often rewards silence and conformity. So if you're watching this, feeling stuck or broken or invisible, I want you to hold on. You are not alone. Your story is still being written, and your best chapters are yet to come. When I think back to the day Vexel fired me, it feels like a defining moment, not just because I lost a job, but because it changed everything. That moment when they said I wasn't the right culture fit and cut me loose to avoid paying. My $500,000 commission was supposed to break me. They thought they were shutting the door on my career, my future, and my voice. Instead, it opened a new door, one that led me to something I never expected: freedom, purpose, and a chance to rewrite my story on my own terms. Losing that job was brutal. It wasn't just about the paycheck or the commission, it was the betrayal. The sting of realizing that all the hours, the late nights, the sacrifices, they meant nothing to them when money and politics came into play. When a company you've poured your soul into turns on you, it shakes your faith in everything. But I won't lie, I didn't just roll over and accept it. I fought back. I fought for that $500,000 commission they tried to deny me. I took the client with me, and watching the division implode from within was a small victory. Yes. But more than that, it was proof that I wasn't the problem. The problem was a toxic culture, greed, and short-sighted leadership. Still, the story doesn't end there. After the dust settled and the legal battles faded, I realized something powerful. I had a choice. I could let bitterness consume me, or I could transform that pain into purpose. I could let that experience define me as a victim, or I could use it as a catalyst to build something better. So I did what many might have thought impossible. I founded Lyceum, a company born not just from my expertise, but from a vision to create a workplace where respect, transparency, and integrity weren't just buzzwords, but the foundation. A place where people wouldn't be discarded because of office politics or greed, but where their worth would be seen and valued. Building Lyceum was one of the hardest challenges of my life. I had to rebuild my reputation, prove my worth to new clients, and create an entirely new team from scratch. There were setbacks, long nights, and moments when doubt whispered that maybe I had overestimated myself. But every hurdle reinforced my resolve. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: adversity is inevitable. Life will throw curveballs, sometimes devastating ones, and they might come when you least expect them. But it's not the setback that defines you. It's how you rise after the fall. It's how you decide to respond. For anyone listening who's facing betrayal, loss, or injustice, here's what I want you to know from my journey. Your worth is never determined by one company or one moment in time. Getting fired, passed over, or pushed aside doesn't mean you lack talent or value. It means that place wasn't the right fit for you, plain and simple. Your skills, your passion, your character, they are your true currency, and no one can take them away unless you let them. Stand up for yourself, even when it's hard. I fought for my commission not just for the money, but because it was about dignity and fairness. Sometimes the fight isn't easy, and it might feel like you're pushing against a wall. But when you know your value, don't let anyone diminish it. Your voice matters. If a door closes, build a new one. Sometimes, what seems like a rejection is actually redirection. Lyceum wasn't just a business to me. It was a chance to create something aligned with my values and vision. If your current path isn't serving you, have the courage to create your own path, no matter how daunting it seems. Find your tribe. I couldn't have done this alone. Mentors, friends, former colleagues, they were my lifelines when I doubted myself. Surround yourself with people who believe in you, who challenge you to grow, and who stand by you when the road gets rough. Community is everything. Forgiveness is not for them, it's for you. Holding on to anger and bitterness is a heavy burden. Forgiving those who wronged you doesn't mean excusing their behavior or forgetting what happened. It means freeing yourself from the grip of resentment so you can move forward unencumbered. Forgiveness was the key that unlocked my peace. Share your story. It's more powerful than you think. When I started speaking openly about what happened, I realized my story was bigger than just me. It gave others permission to speak their truths and inspired those feeling stuck to take action. Your story, with all its pain and triumph, can be a beacon for others. The road from heartbreak to breakthrough is never smooth. There will be days when the doubts come rushing back, when you question if you're strong enough, or if your dream is too big. But those moments shape you. They deepen your empathy. They sharpen your vision. They remind you why you started. If you're watching this and feeling lost, stuck, or crushed by betrayal, remember this. Your story is not over. The best chapters are still unwritten. You have the power to reclaim your narrative. Maybe your next step is standing up for yourself at work. Maybe it's walking away from a toxic environment. Maybe it's finally launching that side hustle or business idea you've been too afraid to pursue. Whatever it is, take that step. Even if it's small, it's progress, because the longer you wait, the more time you spend trapped in fear, doubt, and regret. You deserve more. You deserve respect. You deserve to thrive. So here's my challenge to you. Start today. Do one thing to reclaim your power. Update your resume. Reach out to a mentor. Start building your vision. Believe in yourself a little more. The path won't always be easy, but it will be worth it. Thank you for listening to my story. If it struck a chord, please share it with someone who needs encouragement. If you're on your own journey of reclaiming your worth after betrayal, comment below. I want to hear from you and support you. Remember, the best revenge is not destruction or bitterness. It's building a life so full of purpose and strength that no one can ever take it away. Here's to your comeback. Here's to your future. And here's to turning pain into purpose. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.